Okay, welcome to Mavericks Brewing. Again, we're making a starter today. Actually, we're making two starters, so that's why we're using the big Erlenmeyer flask. 5,000 cc flask. We're basically making beer. We're putting about 5,000 cc's of water, and I'm letting it boil down. Actually, what I'm really doing is letting this thing boil for about 20 minutes to pretty much sterilize the inside of the bottle. But it's just kind of overkill considering we're going to boil it for another 30 minutes. But I like to be kind of safe. So we're also boiling it down to where I get my water within close to 5,000 cc's. And then I'm going to add in an extract. Let me kind of get some of this stuff out of the way here. All right. We're going to add in Mutton's Light. What I use for all my starters. It's pretty easy. Pretty easy to figure out how much you need. You got to have the right specific gravity, which is about 1.043 to 1.049 original gravity. Promotes good yeast development. And we're going to add this in and we're going to boil this just like we would brewing a batch of beer, except for we're doing a really, really small scale. Now, we're going to add our yeast to it later, but we're going to go through this whole process. The big thing about these Erlenmeyer flasks, narrow neck, a lot of hot water, and if you pour the wort in too fast, it reacts pretty unfavorably by doing a boil over. You have to continuously stir it. I have a big long wand. I use a skewer to stir it up. It's real easy, especially with this big flask. And we're going to go through this whole process today. Just to kind of help you out. You want to save money? This is what you do. When you're doing a 5-gallon batch, it's not such a big deal to go out and buy, 1 packet of yeast or 1 packet of dry yeast. Problem is, Mavericks doesn't brew on small scales. We brew on large scales. And if we're doing 30 gallons of beer, if you equate basically homebrew methodology, you would need 6 packets of yeast, and with each yeast packet costing roughly $7 a packet for Y yeast, liquid yeast, you can understand that that's $42, and that just goes to the cost of the beer. So what we're trying to do is reduce the cost of the beer and pass it on. So let's go through the process. I'm going to kind of edit it a little bit so you're not bored completely. But what I'm going to do is shut this off right now because we're right at the end of that boil. I'm going to go ahead and shut my heat off. Now, why do I shut my heat off? Mainly because if I don't, and I try to pour this in at a boil, it will definitely boil over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let it settle down a little bit, the temperature to drop just a little bit, so I can put this in. The more I see bubbles and everything, I don't want to be putting wort in. I'm going to have to do it real slow. So we're just going to cut a little corner off this bag and pour it in. This is 1 pound. 1 pound equates to about 500 grams. And 5,000 cc's of water, you're going to want to use 100 grams per 1,000 cc. So I need 500 grams. That's what 1 pound is. It's 528 grams roughly. But I do have a little bit of extra water in there. So what we're going to do is we're going to probably maybe pour a little bit out. Just under 5,000, because as we add this in, obviously it's going to increase the volume. But we want it right about that 5,000 mark. Okay, so we'll be back in just a second, and I'll get everything set up to pour, and we'll keep going. Okay, I've cut the corner off my bag, and what I'm going to do is start pouring this in. Remember, take it slow. This thing can boil over. The less you put in at the beginning, it'll eventually kind of calm down, but you may see a little bit of a boil over. So now, if your tip of your bag starts getting clogged up, don't sweat it. The reason I kind of let this thing sit down for a little bit, one, the steam comes off a little bit, and I'm not having to deal with the steam pouring up into the bag, but I'm still going to get chunks. I guarantee it. It's going to get down the sides of this thing. It's going to look messy until it starts heating up again. So we're going to go real slow and everybody hold their breath and hope we don't have a boil over. But the real key is to do it pretty slow at the beginning, because you can see that it wants to bubble up. And it will, if you're not careful. As you can tell, I got a little bit of a goo thing forming at the very top. I'm just going to let that baby drop out, kind of readjust my bag a little bit. And again, this, you know, take your time. It's going to be a little messy. I try not to be too messy, but it definitely gets a little messy. So, especially when it's just a little hole. But I try to keep it going. Now once I get it going, I can kind of watch it and see if it's going to bubble up on me. And right now it's not doing that. So we're just going to keep putting this water in. This is just extract. It's basically, you know, if you stayed with us the last time, it's basically concentrated wort, or concentrated grains. So if we were doing an all grain batch, this is what we would be making. But again, it's getting a little bit thick. I'm putting a lot in here, and it's going to bubble up. So we got to be real careful, and it's all getting stuck at the top. Not unusual, happens all the time. So in order to get rid of that, I have this little stir stick, and I'll push it down into the mixture. And it's okay, it's going to get all over the sides, but it will eventually fall down in there. The key is we want to be real careful not to too much disturb it. Now we're going to put a little heat on this in a little while, but I've got just a little bit left to go, and I'll make it. I'm going to set this down. But you really want to be careful. I'm telling you, I don't know how many boil overs I've had by doing this and trying to perfect this technique of getting this wort into here, but without making too much of a big mess. All right, all the extract for our wort extract is in. I'm going to kind of push it down pretty good, as much as I can at least, and then we're going to put some heat on it. The steam, as you can tell, it's kind of gooey. It's very sticky. It's like candy. Of course, it's pure sugar, so it will be like candy. But we try to get as much as we can. Now, I take my stir stick, and now all I'm doing is I'm stirring up any chunks and clumps that are in there. Again, your hands are going to get a little sticky. I'm going to kind of tilt it down a little bit. As you can tell, there's still some chunks kind of floating around in there. Now, those will go away too over time, but we want to get as much as we can out when we're doing this. And basically, we just made ourselves a little 5,000 cc plus thing of beer. As you can tell, my 5,000 cc mark is right there. I'm well above that, so I'm going to boil it down until it reaches a 5,000 cc mark. That's where I know I'm at 0.49 or 43. Even though I was at 5,000 cc's of water, my volume's a little high. So we're going to continue, kind of push this down. Once your little stick gets hot enough, kind of mush this stuff down. But it will continue to come down over time, and it won't be up there. All right. Got it pretty stirred up. We're going to start the boil again, or at least the simmer, and I'm going to turn my heat way low. I do not want this thing to get away from me. So I'm going to turn my gas on, kick on my heat, and I'm going to adjust this thing down super low, as low as I can get it, and keep the flame. And the reason I do that is because I don't want this thing to boil over. And I'm going to have to be real attentive. I'm going to have to be real attentive on how this thing is cooking up. Because this narrow head will just go like a volcano if I'm not careful. Also, when you're stirring with your stick, when you come in here and start stirring, I like to stir right away and start getting it going. Because the heat's going to be coming up. And as long as I keep stirring it up, it will, excuse that screech, but that was the propane tank I was kicking out of the way. But I'll start stirring it up right now. That way I know it's mixing up real good as the heat's coming on it. And all I really needed to do is simmer. I'm just mixing the water and the sugar together. And all I really need to do is have it simmer. So I'm left-handed, so sorry my arm's in the way. But we're just going to keep stirring. And okay, Well, why to make the Erlenmeyer flask huge and bigger than my head? Well, so you can see it a little better. Basically, we need to get our wort down to about 5,000 cc's. We want that 500 grams to 5,000 cc's of water mixture. That gives us our perfect OG for our yeast starter. Now, we're not really making beer here. We want to make yeast. We want to make a lot of yeast because we got to put these in our regular fermenters. When you're talking about a 30-gallon fermenter, requires a certain amount of yeast. And there's a lot of websites out there that will calculate the exact amount of yeast you need for a specific gallonage of beer. I find that for a 30 gallons, about 3,000 cc's is okay. And you go, whoa, wait a second, you're making 5,000. Well, I'm making 5,000 because I'm making another batch of beer also at the same time. We're making a small batch IPA this weekend, and we're making a large batch pale ale also this weekend. So we need 2 starters. Now the cool thing is about both of these is the fact that we use the same yeast for both beers. They both work really well. So we're going to use 2,000 cc's of this yeast slurry that we're going to make and 3,000 cc's of yeast slurry and pour them in 2 different fermenters. That's just the way we're doing it. It's a lot easier to make one big batch of yeast starter than it is to make 2 batches. I can make 2 batches. I do have 2 stir plates that we've made, and we'll get to stir plates and everything in a little while. But the whole thing is right now is I don't want that thing to boil over. I really don't want it to boil over because that'll mess everything up. Do not leave your wort in this stage without keeping a clear view of what's going on. Okay, stir it occasionally, but be real careful. Now, when I stir this, I'm going to kind of hopefully show you this, and I'm going to try to do it right now. If I put that cold thing in, I'm just going to drop it in there and get it warmed up a little bit. Now, as I stir this, I want to evenly heat, and I'm going to do it very slowly, because if I go too fast, then my wort will boil over. I'm not saying that I might not have a boil over anyways, but I heat it up slow, and I stir it slow. But this is our yeast starter. I just want to get it kind of turning. I'm just looking for that top to kind of rotate. And once I got that top rotating pretty good, all I got to do, and I've almost got it there, is let it sit. It'll rotate for a little while. I'll wait. I'll see it not rotating again, and we'll do it again. But that's about it. I mean, there really isn't much to it. It's a small batch of beer. The difference in this is we're not putting hops in, okay? We're not going to put any hops in this at all, okay? This is a clean wort or a sweet wort without any hops in it. Well, because you don't need hops. We're making a beer later, and that's where we're going to put the hops in. Right now, we're just trying to make starter. And I keep saying that over and over again, but that's really what we're trying to make is a starter. And we're going to go through some of that other process. This is just the boiling process, and once we get through that, then we're going to start the cooling process and how to keep this thing sterile. And that's really important in yeast production, because we don't want this to pull in bacteria and a wild yeast strain in this process. And we're going to have to be real sterile when we get to that cool side of this. And I'll show you a really easy technique on how to do that. Okay, we'll see you in a bit. Okay, wow, we're still here, still waiting. It's going to be a slow process. Take your time with it. I can already see it's kind of boiling up right now. Well, what type, we're going to turn it down just a little bit because I'm just seeing it come up. And I really don't want it to overboil. So we're taking it real easy. I got to let this stuff cook slow. But I can see the bubbles forming now. And we'll probably start fighting the foam here in a little while. Okay, you said, well, what wort do I use? Why do you use Mutton's Light? Well, to me, Mutton's Light is probably the simplest extract I can use. Meaning, it's very similar to a lot of the beers that we make. It's a lighter type of malt, and and it doesn't affect the taste of the beer at all. You say, well, if I put in this much, it's going to mess up the taste of the beer. No, because by the time we get to the point of pouring it in, a lot of that's going to be yeast, and it's just yeast is going to be permeating through this thing. And we'll do some more video when that happens, but the wort should be a lighter wort. Now, could you use, like, do a small all grain batch of the beer that you're going to be making and make a starter for it? Sure, you could do that. It seems like a lot of work to me. I particularly like making my starters with extract. It's just easier to do. It's one step. I don't have to mash in and all that. So if I was to like make a wheat beer, and I knew I was making a wheat beer, I do have some wheat extract that I can use, like maybe half and half, Mutton's Light and a wheat extract, and that way I kind of stay with the consistency of the beer that I'm making. But right now we're going to be making a pale ale and IPA, so there's real no reason to change from the Mutton's Light right now. But it's going pretty good. So we'll see in a bit. As soon as it boils down to 5,000, we're going to move on to the next step, and I'll show you that. Now it's got to this point where it's starting to foam. Okay, well, do you drop your stir stick into the middle? I am always hesitant to that, and this is where I have to adjust my temperatures quite a bit. And I'm going to have to get up here and do this in a second, because I can already see that it's getting to that point where I need to bring my temperature down a little bit. Now that I've got nice bubbles forming, I still want to keep the temperature up somewhat so it'll actually start steaming off and get me down to temperature. But we got a nice, good little boil, and I don't mind a little foam, even if it gets up to here, but a lot of foam's going to be terrible, and we're going to have to fight it a little bit, and sometimes even have to turn the heat off. So hopefully that won't happen in this case. But if it does foam up, then all you got to do is, instead of stirring the actual wort, you can just stir the foam, and that'll keep down that foam layer. If it starts getting out of hand and you're thinking you're going to get a boil over, shut your heat off. It'll shut it down, okay? And try not to touch the wort during that time, because if you touch that wort with that stir stick, it will shoot up like a volcano, and you'll be done. You'll have tons of, not done, but you'll have tons of wort all over the place. But the one. Oh, welcome back. What we're going to do now is we've reached our 5,000 cc's in our boil, and you can tell it's kind of settling down. I've turned off the heat. Now we're in a kind of a critical stage, and we want to keep our wort free from wild yeast, and you want to do this as soon as possible. And this bottle is sanitizer, and this is just a piece of aluminum foil, and what I'm doing is just sanitizing the aluminum foil. That's all I'm doing. The piece is going to go up against the top. I'll let that drain off for a second. Now, from this point on, hands get sanitized, everything else gets sanitized. You're going to be going to that cold step like you would with a brewing process, and you really need to make sure that everything stays sanitized. So I got my aluminum foil, I've sprayed it. Now I'm just going to cover my wort top. I just cinch it down. Okay. Now it's super hot right now, but that's okay. I'm just turning off my propane and everything. What we're going to do is let this kind of settle down for a second. We're going to go ahead and stick it in the cold room to let it cool at room temperature for a little while. Then we're going to take it, we're going to stick it up in the freezer. You can make an ice water bath for this if you want to cool it down. We're trying to get down to the fermentation temperatures. We're a little bit lower than what we're going to ferment at. Of course, we ferment at 66 to 68 degrees for an ale. And just like you would regular beer, we're going to bring it down to that temperature. Then we're going to add in our yeast culture into the Erlenmeyer flask and put our foam on it. We're going to go through those steps in a little bit. But right now I'm going to pick it up. I'm going to move it into the cold room. If you don't have a cold room yet, you might want to think about building one. This is basically my fridge, and when I open this up, you're going to see Stout Anarchy in there. And I just built this as an AC on the other side. And it's big enough to store both my fermenters. As you can tell, there's two fermenters. Let's see if I can get this a little bit better visual. Let me get out of the way. All right, so that's where we keep our fermenters. It's foam insulated on the inside, and our fermenters stay in there at a constant temperature. We're going to go ahead and stick this wort in there for a little while to get the temperature down a little bit, and then we'll stick it in the freezer. And once it gets down to temperature, then we can pitch our yeast. We'll pitch our yeast, and we'll be back when we do that. Okay. All right, let me put that in there. But you better have some mitts, because this bottle is hot, and you want to get two hands on it because there's a lot of wort in there. So I'm grabbing it. I'm just going to set it down on the floor in here. Put it in here. Set it down on the floor. Very gently. Close it up. And let the cold room, or the fermenting room, do its job. And we'll come back in probably an hour, maybe a little bit less, and we'll go ahead and stick it in the freezer, and then we'll drop that wort down. So the first part of the starter process is done. Now what we got to do is we got to pull out our yeast. Now you can use a 1Y yeast pack. Go in and buy your pack. Pour it in there if you have a big batch you're going to be making, and you can make more yeast. But if you're just doing 5-gallon batches, you can get away with just a pack of yeast. But obviously, we're going to be doing about 40 gallons tomorrow. So, well, maybe a little less. But we're going to be doing huge batches of beer, and we need to make a lot more yeast. So let me go get it. I'll be right back. Just give me 1 second, and I'll show you what we're going to produce our starter, that big starter, with this little itty bitty thing of yeast. All right. Stay with me. I can't leave this out for very long, but as you can tell, I'll bring it closer. So I have test tubes full of yeast. I'm going to pull one of these out, and I'll show it to you. There's your yeast in a test tube. Now I freeze my yeast, and what we're going to do, put the rest of them back in there so they don't all freeze. Normally I wouldn't take all of them out, but I wanted to show you. But I perfected the technique of freezing yeast. And but this is it right here. Test tube of yeast. I'm going to go ahead and take that and bring it into the refrigerator, stick it in there, let it thaw out naturally, and so it doesn't thaw too quickly. And then we're going to put that yeast in about an hour. So we'll see it a bit, and we'll go through that other process. Hey, okay, now our wort has cooled down. It's now about 70 degrees. Nah, probably a little bit less, probably like 66 degrees. The way I tell is whether it's cooler than the surrounding environment right now, and I know what the temperature is, about 70 degrees, and it's cooler than that. So what we got to do now is kind of set up for our yeast starter, and we want to be as quick as possible. So you don't want stuff to kind of drop down into your wort. So pick a place that's not super dusty, but I pretty much clean up before I start working out here. But you want to cap it back up as soon as possible. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little yeast nutrient. I've sterilized my spoon, and I've basically this yeast nutrient is got some zinc in it and some other things in it that lets yeast grow even faster. It's kind of like a starter powder for yeast. It makes them want to get moving. Okay, so we're going to take off our cap and leave it sitting right close to us. We're going to put about a teaspoon per gallon, and that's pretty good. I usually just one big drop in there. Then we're going to cap up this thing again so it doesn't get bad. And we're going to go ahead and put our cap back on. Once I put my cap back on, I'm just going to give it a nice stir with that yeast nutrient in. The big thing to have in a yeast nutrient is the zinc. And I want to give my wort right now a real good shake, okay, just to get that mixed in. We're going to do that again once we get our foam set up, that you can kind of see just the particles of wort and stuff kind of floating around in there. But we're going to put our yeast in here in just a second. I'm going to go get it. We also don't want to stop this up like we're making beer, okay? When you're making beer, you're trying to make alcohol. That's not what we're trying to do here. What we're trying, not that that won't be a byproduct, but because obviously yeast, they eat sugar and divide and everything else, but they poop out alcohol and CO2. So we got a little way for the CO2 to get out, but at the same time, we don't want it to. We want to make more yeast. We don't want to kill off our yeast with the alcohol or slow down the process. So we're not really trying to make beer. We're trying to propagate yeast. And in the first 48 to 72 hours is when that happens. More yeast gets formed, and really that's what we're trying to do, because we want as much yeast to be formed in here as possible. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, first we put the yeast nutrient in. It helps, got the zinc in it, it helps for yeast propagation. And then also we're going to put a foam stopper in here to allow the air to come out. Allow the CO2 to come out and get out and keep oxygen in there. And we're going to stir it up vigorously once we put the yeast in it. Okay, what I've done is I've just taken off the aluminum foil, and I have this piece of foam that I'm putting onto my Erlenmeyer thighs. This is what we're going to put on, and we're going to rubber band it down, and that allows the air to escape, but it allows oxygen to come in and no particles or anything else. I'll get that secured a little better in a second, but I'm just putting it on there for right now. That one little rubber band is not going to hold it on. All that was spray sanitized. You want to always keep something like this. I always spray my hands off as I'm working in this process, just because I don't want stuff, wild yeast, bacteria, anything. So at least I have my hands sanitized the way it is. We have our yeast culture right here. Just to let you see it. I've been sitting here for a little bit here mixing it up. It's going to take a little bit longer, so we're going to put this in as well. This is the next step. Now that we've got our yeast nutrient in there, we've got our wort set up, we have our foam sanitized. What I'm going to do with this is, first off, I'm going to spray sanitizer all over it. Okay? I'm spraying sanitizer all over this test tube. I don't want anything living at all. Well, there'll be some things living on there, but I want to reduce that chance of it getting into our wort. I want to make sure that my yeast is all mixed into that solution that's in there. Okay, I don't want to leave any at the bottom because I won't be able to get it out. So it looks like it's pretty close to being there, and that's all yeast. It's all live yeast. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop off our foam. All right. And I'm just going to set it right down here, upside down, so it's still sanitizer on the top. I'll probably spray it again. I'm going to go ahead and pour my yeast solution in, not touching the sides with the test tube, and set that off to the side. Grab this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray this all over again. And I'm going to wring it out with that side. I'm going to wring it out with that side inside, letting that sanitizer really get in there, and then I'm going to grab it and put it right back on. Okay. Now that I put that back on, it's time for me to kind of hold that down, and you need to oxygenate your wort. Oxygen is going to go through here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to vigorously stir my solution. And I'll do this for a little while. Try to get as much oxygen. You want to see that foam coming up. You want to definitely shake this. Be careful. You don't want to drop your flask. But again, you want to get as much oxygen into that wort as possible. Okay, now the last step before we completely seal this up is we need to put in our magnet inside the wort. You know, a magnet? Well, our stir plate acts on a magnet, and here's the magnet right here. Just a little magnet, and it goes into the bottom of the Erlenmeyer flask inside the wort. So we're going to sterilize it. I'm sorry, sanitize it, not sterilize. Sanitize it. I'm just going to lift this up briefly and drop it right in there. Okay. Now that's in the bottom. Now we're going to go get our stir plate, and we're going to kind of move the whole entire operation over into the cold room, because I'm going to set up the stir plate in the cold room. So give me a second, and we'll go head over to the cold room. I'll reset up the cameras, and you can see what I'm talking about. Okay? Okay. Now we're over here at the cold room, and I've set up my stir plate, connected it to my power, and inside here is a fan, and it's got two earth magnets on it, rare earth magnets on it. And when I turn, and a resistor switch. When I turn this thing on, those rare earth magnets with the wort will catch that little magnet inside the wort and spin the wort and stir my wort for me. And I can adjust the speed on it to make it happen. So what I do is I just set it right down in here, and I'll kind of give you change the view. You're not going to be able to see me, but that's probably a good thing. I'm going to go get our wort container. And that yeast is already starting to activate. So we're going to set our wort right down here. And I'm listening for whether or not the magnet clicks there to the magnet on the fan. Now what I'm going to listen for is that the magnet's spinning. And it may be hard to hear. And this sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Sometimes I have to readjust it. But I'm also looking to see if the wort is turning. And if it's not, then I need to readjust it. I put it back in. So I'm hearing it spin right now. Okay, so now we got that set up. You can see, let me see if I can get you closer. You can see the wort spinning, the magnet spinning, and the wort is now stirring up. Okay, so we're done with setting up. What we just finished was creating a yeast starter. We went through the process of boiling the wort, using a malt extract, Mutton's Light. We let it cool back down, just like you would with brewing. Cooled it back down, sprayed everything down, sanitized everything. We put a foam stopper on it so oxygen can go through, because we don't want just CO2 in there. We want oxygen because we want to propagate more yeast. Now, this is not making beer, it's making yeast, and that's, you got to know the difference between the two. Because what we're trying to do is make enough yeast to go in both of these beers 3 days from now. All right, well, what will happen is in the next couple days, I'll be able to notice a milky, whitish, swirling substance in there, and that's the yeast. When we go to pull this in 2.5 days, I'll also smell the yeast. I'll look for odd off smells that don't go along with yeast, like bacterial infection, band-aidy smell, a real bad banana smell, anything that would indicate to me that it's just not a good bready yeast smell. And it's real important to do that, because if I make 30 gallons of beer and I make another 10 gallons of another beer, and we pour bad yeast into the fermenters or wild yeast in the fermenters, we're going to have real problems when we're done, meaning we're going to have to throw out 30 gallons of beer. and I don't want to do that. So we'll see you in a few days. I'm going to post this online, so you'll see this process. Come join us on Saturday for a live brew feed. We're going to have a chat room, and that will be on, I can't remember the date, it's in February. So if you're watching this after it's been posted for a while, you're going to go on Saturday and go, whoa, they were supposed to do a live feed. Well, no, it's this weekend, and we hope to see you there, answer some of your questions. That way I don't have to talk to necessarily a computer. I can talk to a live person and try to help you out with your home brewing, or whether or not you just want to learn something about brewing. All right.